Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored and so wicked happy that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guests today are Deborah Underwood and Sam Wedelich. They are here to celebrate Bearplane. Before we invite Deborah and Sam into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by My Brother Came Home with a Cone on His Head, the delightful picture book by Paul Warnke. A leg injury and a visit to the vet leads to a very scary time for one little dog who just wants to play with his brother. This is a charming story for young readers and their favorite furry friends. It's a beautiful story about loving and caring for an animal, friendship, and the love between brothers. Here's one of the many 5-star reviews the book has received on Amazon. What a sweet story about two puppies that love one another. The illustrations are great. It's a great book for kids to read about responsibility. Get your copy today. My Brother Came Home with a Cone on His Head by Paul Warnke. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by The Adventures of Harry and Friends, the wonderful picture book series by Sarah Belisa Tucker. Is your child afraid of the dark? Are your kids scared of the monsters under their bed? I'm Not Afraid has helped thousands of parents teach their kids to face their fears. Grab your copy of this book and the other 6 books in the Adventure of Harry and Friends series on Amazon. It's a really wonderful series. We love it. We just ran into Sarah Belisa Tucker down at the Florida Homeschool Convention. People just love the books and they loved her booth. Get your copies today. The Adventures of Harry and Friends. Joining us right now from San Francisco and Nyack, New York, we have a great author-illustrator team here. They're here to celebrate Bearplane, a great new picture book that you and your kids will adore. Please welcome to the show the author, Deborah Underwood, and the illustrator, Sam Wedelich. Deborah, Sam, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Sam?
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having us.
So that first voice was Deborah, and then she introduced Sam. I'm really excited to have you here. I'm really excited because this is actually the first time that Deborah and Sam have had a chance to see each other in person, and that's always exciting.
Yeah.
People don't realize that typically an author and an illustrator don't have much communication during the creation of a book. Deborah, I was amazed at that. Was that something that you had to kind of train yourself to be able to let go of your manuscript and just be confident that the illustrator and the publisher were going to do right by it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It is just a weird kind of cognitive thing because you would think that we would be talking on the phone and chatting about things. But when I started realizing that if I were writing a picture book, I would not want an illustrator hovering over my shoulder saying, oh, you know what? I don't like drawing cities. Can you set it in the country? I don't like drawing buildings. Can you do, can you make it a barn instead? And how about a chicken? I'd rather draw chickens. You see that would just take away a lot of my creative choices. And I finally understood that that's the same way with illustrators. They need the ability to work in freedom. You just kind of feel like you finish a manuscript as a writer and then you are done. After you've done the edits, you really need to let it go. And I had a really profound demonstration of this early on with The Quiet Book, which I wrote, and I'd imagined children characters, like one children character going through the entire book. And my editor said, we found this amazing illustrator, Renata Lipska, but she does animals really well. And we were wondering if you would be open to that. And I said, sure. And then, The Quiet Book turned into this really big thing. And I'm so grateful because Renata just did stuff that I would have never even imagined. So that was a lesson early on that was like, you know what? It's good to just let go and let somebody else work their magic. And sometimes you just get this amazing synergy that you would have never anticipated.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Deborah, you just answered the question that I was going to ask Sam. Just that whole thing about the author going, no, I want the pocketbook to be red. I didn't want it to be blue. And can you put tassels on her shoes? So I'm wondering, Sam, the same thing. Was it difficult for you initially to kind of just be handed a manuscript, taking somebody else's creative idea and having somebody say, okay, tell the rest of the story?
I think it's new. This is my first illustrator-only project, so I have two author-illustrator books already out. So it was definitely a new experience, but I have to say that Deborah's manuscripts are so amazing, and she's such a rich world builder that I saw it immediately the first time I read it. It was like a movie playing in my mind. So I had the most fun just bringing the characters to life and playing in this awesome Bearplane universe that she had dreamed up. So I felt like the luckiest.
I love, and we've had other illustrators and authors use that term, playing. That, you know, as you're creating this book and it's your work, it's your profession, but you're playing. I've had the blessing to have that same type of job. I go into schools and do educational magic shows, and people go, that must be really hard work sometimes. And it's like, well, it's really hard and it takes a lot of energy, but it's not work, it's play. I'm having a fun time.
Yeah, I think I love Sister Karita Kent created this word called plork, which is play and work together, and I connect with that a lot in the creative process. I think for me, the mentality of play is important for idea generating, right? There's obviously always parts that are cumbersome or mundane, you know, when you're drawing the same scene for the third or fourth or fifth time. But that first idea generating part needs to be very, right brain, like very just loose and free and as playful as possible. And I think it also connects to our audience, right? Like children can tell if you were having a good time making it. I think they know.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you mentioned Sister Karita Kent as an inspiration. If you're not familiar with her, Deborah, you told me that you spent a semester in Boston, so you were probably familiar with one of her bigger works. She was a little subversive, and she created this beautiful illustration on this gas container, this giant kind of gas thing in Boston that stores natural gas, and it's huge. And she went and created this. It looks like a rainbow. Most people are, oh, look at that beautiful rainbow. And wait a minute, is Ho Chi Minh there in the blue stripe? And that's a horse. And it's really cool. And I have a connection with her because the way I learned how to do educational magic shows is I had no training. I studied a little bit. I go, I'm going to volunteer and I'm going to do a year's worth of shows in the Boston Public Schools. And at the end of the year, I was gifted with one of her prints that she autographed. And I was like, this, yeah, I do in a year. This is worth it. Yeah. So Deborah, tell us a little bit about Bearplane and this bear world that you created.
Yeah, you know, I was trying to think. I actually just kind of pulled out my folder of drafts and things, and I was trying to look for the initial spark of the idea. And I really think it was just the word Bearplane. I think it just popped into my head, and then it was like, well, okay, what would a Bearplane look like? And what would a Bearport look like? And what would they serve on the drink card? And what kind of things would be involved? And it really was, this was one of those picture books that was just kind of a lot of play. And initially it was a very smooth sort of plane trip and there were no delays, nothing went wrong, whatever. And one of the things that my very smart editor suggested was, she has kids and I do not, so that might have influenced this, but she was saying, you know, I have young kids. there are some weird things that you forget about on airplanes, like your ears pop and sometimes there are delays and, and even just weird things like you go to the airport and they take your suitcase and it's rolling away and you're like, am I going to get that thing back? My stuff's in there. So she suggested that I put in just some gentle kind of obstacles, like they get on the plane and the plane does not take off immediately. I mean, how often does the plane take off immediately? They sit there and they wait and the kids' ears are a little uncomfortable. And she was really envisioning it as this way to introduce kids to all of the obstacles that they might encounter on plane travel in a very gentle way, just to sort of get them accustomed to it. And also just things like, airports are loud, right? They can be loud if you're sensitive to noise like I was when I was a kid. I was the kid who went to daycare one day and hid under the table crying because it was so loud and never went back. So just trying to put, just make it comforting and have a few little obstacles. But then ultimately a really lovely trip for them and all sorts of new things to see and do. So I was so grateful for her input because I really feel like it strengthened it and made it more of a tool that parents can use with their kids to help them understand what might be ahead.
Yeah. And it's much more realistic.
Yeah, it is.
I was just going to jump in and say, I have two small kids, and we just went on our first big flight after the pandemic. And, I looked through my copy with them and kind of walked my youngest one through it. He didn't really remember flying. And I think, one of the things we try to do as a family always, which I think I got maybe from Mr. Rogers, right, is telling kids what's going to happen, like walking them through, especially a new experience, because it just brings a sense of calm, familiarity. You're informing me about all these new things. That gives them a chance to ask questions. And then when you're doing the things, it doesn't feel like such a gauntlet of your competency, right? Like you feel a little bit more agency. And that was one of the things I immediately loved when I read the story the first time. So.
Yeah.
One of the things that after our wonderful editor, Jess Garrison, brought this up to us, or to me rather, was I was thinking of this trip that I took with my sister and her kids to Disneyland when my niece was about 8. And I remember being at, I think, the Sacramento airport. And my 8-year-old niece was pulled aside from one of these securities, random, swab her finger. But I know, and the thing is, I understand security is important, but she was terrified. And thankfully, I got pulled aside too, so I could be with her and try to reassure her. So I put a thing into Bearplane where the little bear unintentionally sets off the security thing, like we all do, right? We forget the water bottle or whatever. And it's like, oh, you know what? You just have to put that into the tub and then go through again and it's all right. So just really trying to build in those things so there won't be surprises that are terrifying. I will never forget the look on my niece's face. I was just so mad. It's like, she's 8. She's wearing a Snow White dress. Leave her alone. But anyway, so hopefully parents will be able to use it in that way.
Yeah, I don't think my kids, or at least when they were young, we didn't have to take off the shoes and everything. And I'm imagining that if you just show up at the airport and you don't have that Mr. Rogers kind of pep talk with your kids, and suddenly they got to take off their shoes and their belts and put everything through this machine, I imagine they'd be a little weirded out.
Especially when you're hurrying, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like in that moment you have time to be like, okay, let's talk about what's happening. Because there's usually 100 people behind you looking at their watches and waving their boarding passes. And that energy can feel, I think, like a lot to kids. So,
yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering. I know in the notes that the flight experiences a little bit of turbulence. How did you choose to illustrate that? I'm guessing we didn't have a bear up on the top of the ceiling of the plane during the turbulence.
I lucked out. Deborah had this awesome note in there. They had just been served honey, and then immediately after, in the rhyming text, someone is super sticky. So it's just honey flying through the air and landing on a grumpy passenger who starts out the journey maybe not a fan of the small cub, but things change. So
that's really, really fun. Tell me, Deborah, You're talking about the inspiration for this just kind of being that play on words, Bearplane. Is that kind of where all of your ideas spring from? Just like a word will spring into my mind, or I'll see something and boom, I have an idea for a story?
It really varies. That was the case, like, for Interstellar Cinderella, for example. That kind of popped into my head, and I was like, oh, that has to already be a book. And it wasn't. And I was really, really excited that it wasn't. But sometimes they come out of drawing. Sometimes I'll just be doodling or sketching and something will pop up. And sometimes it's just sitting there and just trying. And I would love it if everything just kind of fell into my lap, but it doesn't. And it was interesting what Sam was saying earlier about playing, because I've really had a lot of trouble working over the last couple of years. And I think a lot of that is just all of this worry and all these decisions that we're all trying to, negotiate with the pandemic, and just not feeling like I had that space to just say, okay, everything's okay. So I'm just gonna think of silly things and try to see what comes of that. It's really been much more of a struggle to sort of sit down and go, all right, going to try to think of ideas now. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I really do agree that I think the reader can tell when you're having fun and just playing. And I'm hoping that is ahead sometime soon.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's really hard to be fun and playful and be open to new ideas when your mind is filled with worry. And should I wear a mask or should I not? And is this mask going to work? They said it was. Now they say it isn't. And do I need another shot? And can I stand 6 feet away? And there's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And then trying to just weigh in. Well, I'm seeing this friend and she cares for her elderly mother. So what does that do in terms of changing it just feels like this web of complications. And I just sometimes just kind of want to hide under my bed for the next 2 years. But I have a cat. It's okay. I'll be fine. So.
Sam, you mentioned that you have a couple of young kids, and the thing that being in various stages of lockdown for 2 years, when you're almost 100 years old like me, that's just a little percentage of my life. It's just like a little bit less than 2% of my life. But with a kid who's, I'm not sure how old your kids are, but a kid who's 5 or 6, that's a big chunk of their lived experience at this point in their life has been under lockdown. And now we're coming out of it. Are you finding that it's not like, okay, the doors are open, go back to normal? You were mentioning that your kids had forgotten that they had flown before.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. So my kids are now 6 and 9. So when we entered lockdown, they were 4 and almost 7. Right before my daughter's 7th birthday. Was when and at the time, I should add, we started the pandemic in New York City. So we moved to Nyack during COVID. So it was pretty dramatic. They were in school, on a Thursday, and then that Friday we were texting all the other parents, had kind of been watching the news, and we were like, we're just going to call it. We're going to keep them home. And then by the following Monday, the schools were shut down. They built an emergency hospital in the park across the street from our apartment. It was intense. And I think it's been a slow journey out, but we have a lot of conversations, paying a huge amount of attention to their emotional development and their health, in terms of like, what feels safe, what feels comfortable, what choices do you want to make? Talking to them. I mean, now they're completing their first year of in-person school, after having done a lot of remote learning. And we're so happy, like we can definitely tell a huge adjustment for them in terms of social, emotional well-being, to be around friends, even with masks on, and and talking a lot about like personal family choices versus choices that other families are making, especially when the mask mandates ended. I think it's weird. It's just weird. But at the same time, like, I'm thankful to have had, a lot of privilege in our circumstances, and be able to, just use it as a chance to talk to them about these developmental choices, and sort of create a scaffolding for understanding both our individual choices, but also the impact in our communities and how these things are connected. and how we weigh those choices as a family. It's led to a lot of really great conversations. So I don't know. I definitely feel the same sense of burnout and creative frustration, difficulty parenting through it that Deborah was describing. But at this, I don't know. At now, where I am now, I feel more optimistic and feel like they'll be okay long term. But there were hard seasons for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, Sam, you said that this was the first book that you've illustrated. You've written and illustrated books yourself. How was this experience? Is it like, yeah, this is pretty cool, I want to do it again, or yeah, I ain't gonna do that again?
I loved it. No, I think it totally matters what the manuscript is, and I think it clicks or it doesn't. And it was really fun to get to experience that. I've passed on a few things that have come my way that didn't feel like the right fit for whatever reason. This wasn't that. This did click and feel like so fun. And like I said, I could immediately see the world. And I felt like that was a good clue to myself, that it was maybe a right path to explore. I love to draw, honestly, and writing is really super hard. Like, people should know how hard it is to write. It's so hard, and I struggle so much in my writing journey, and so in some ways it feels like a fun exercise to just get to play with someone's words and not be responsible for both parts. So I enjoyed it. And I think, I'm open to kind of continuing to build out, my career with both if possible. So we'll see.
Deborah, it must feel good to know that your manuscript passed the test.
It really does. No, I'm very honored because I adore her illustrations so much. And I'm still, we didn't get the finished books till pretty recently. And I'm still kind of looking through and just like seeing some of the snacks on the cart and the airplane. I'm just laughing. I mean, it's just wonderful. And there is an ending that I don't want to spill, but it was just the emotional whatever of the ending was really ratcheted up by one of her wonderful illustrations. So yeah, it was just such a huge pleasure to have it in such great hands. So, and the thing is, I don't really have an idea for illustration style in mind when I write. I just don't. I mean, I don't think visually like that. So it's always just such a wonderful treat to see. Even the first sketches, it's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I can't wait. So yeah.
Well, that's really cool. It sounds like Bearplane is one of those wonderful books that we oftentimes suggest that parents take a picture walk through before you even read the story. Just take a look through the book, look at the pictures, and what do you think is happening here? And it's just such a great way to start those conversations. And like you were saying, Sam, just conversations with our kids is so very important. And it's the reason I launched the Reading with Your Kids podcast, is just to remind parents that books are such a great way to start those conversations that I know, Sam, you're listening to you and looking at you when you talk about your kids. Those conversations that you're having with your kids right now, they're just the start of a lifelong conversation. I'm still having conversations with my two kids, and they're 26 and 29, and they continue every day. And so yesterday, my 29-year-old son said, I got evacuated off a roller coaster. It was so cool. We got to walk through all the different things. He sent me pictures and videos.
That's awesome.
It really is. It really is. Tell me, Sam, before we go, is there any kind of like Easter eggs or surprise? Deborah was saying that she is really amused by some of the snacks that are on the cart. Is that something that you really love doing? Is like, let me be a little like Sister Coretta here and just be a little subversive and put something here that's unexpected.
Yeah, I loved making little extra details. So yeah, the snack cart is full of lots of accurate bear treats reimagined, and like bamboo sticks and termite brittle and all kinds of fun things.
Okay.
Like that. I you can have fun searching for Teddy on almost every page, making an appearance or peeking out from behind something. That was a lot of fun. Otherwise, I think my favorite thing to do in illustration is show emotion. So I just had a blast with all the expressive features and faces, all the emotion of waiting and excitement, and it's my first flight, or confusion, or a little bit of, gentle worry, and then resolution. I had a fun time with that part.
That's wonderful. Hey, I think we could probably talk for hours, but I know you guys want to talk to each other. Where can we go to find out more about Bearplane and to find out more about each of you individually? Why don't we go Deborah, why don't we ask you first?
Okay, well, Bearplane, you can order at any of your normal places. I really encourage people to patronize their independent bookstores because they have just been, they are struggling like a lot of small businesses are struggling, and they are so supportive of authors and illustrators, and we just really need them in the book ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So if you can do that, that is always wonderful. And you can often find their websites and order directly from them online. And I have a website, DeborahUnderwoodBooks.com, which I will try to remember how to update in the next week before the book comes out. That's one of those issues with being an author and not being very technical, but I'm going to do it. So DeborahUnderwoodBooks.com. So awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. And Sam, where can we find out more about you? And also just mention the title of your other books, please.
Sure. So I also have an author-illustrator website. It's just my name, samwedelich.com. And I'm super active on Instagram. So my handle is also my name, @SamWedelich, where I post a lot of process photos and comics and cartoons and just whatever's on my mind. So if you want to get some behind the scenes and anecdotes from me, that's the place to go. And then my other books that are out, they're both spins off of a classic folk tale of Chicken Little. So I have Chicken Little, the Real and Totally True Tale, and Chicken Little and the Big Bad Wolf. And those are both from Scholastic. You can order directly from Scholastic or from, please, your local independent bookstore.
Yeah. And the indie bookstores, you don't even have to, if you love playing with the computer, just find the number, give them a call, say, hey, do you have Bearplane by Deborah Underwood and Sam Wedelich? You don't? Could you order it, please, for me? It'll be there in a couple of days.
Yep.
And you're
it's so fast,
friend.
So easy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. We've had a wonderful time speaking to the author and the illustrator of Bearplane, Deborah Underwood and Sam Wedelich. My friends, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been really wonderful.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Gina Giordano. She'll be here to celebrate, yes, her brand new picture book. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so absolutely wonderful. First, I want to thank our guests, Deborah Underwood and Sam Wedelich. Be sure to check out Bearplane. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Bell Castro, Ashley Contreras, Mirabella Q, Rain Penn. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.